Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Welcome back with Franky and Neug with the PSI Effect Podcast. We are happy to be with you again in this space. And I think we have something interesting for you today that you will enjoy getting into with us. So thank you for being here. But as always, before we get into it, we want to talk a little bit about what's going on. So Franky, how you doing there, sir?
Nuge, I'm in there. I am hanging on. I don't want to make it sound like I'm struggling because I'm blessed. Things are going well. But I have to admit, things are feeling kind of heavy with kind of the state of the world today. There's a lot of different things that are going on in a lot of different places. And some of them are stressful. Some of them are causing anxiety and just trying to navigate those things. And as I'm going on my day-to-day walk and encountering people who may not see things the same way I do. So just trying to figure some of those things out as I go and have the most positive impact that I can, while at the same time maintaining my sanity and peace of mind, because I think that's a bit of a challenge nowadays too, especially with how the news cycle is, incessant, and it's hard to, unplug from all the things that are going on. But I think, with all that's going on, what we're going to talk about today is something that can help our listeners to navigate some of those instances where we may have to have some difficult conversations with people in our lives, or on the job or wherever we may be, to find a new way forward to try to figure out how to do this thing together. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to make it through this stuff is together.
Exactly. Good community is what's really going to help us make it through. And as you mentioned, not everybody has our same perspective on things, as we may not have the same perspective as others. And so that does lead to some challenges sometimes in the conversations that you have. It can be difficult in the personal life. It can be difficult in the professional life. And as you said, you can't step away from it because the news cycle has it moving 24/7.
Yep.
So there's always something out there that's popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, and it's important we remember the importance of human connection in all of this. It's easy for us to get in our echo chambers and create an information bubble around ourselves. But we really need to prioritize the human interaction piece of this puzzle. And, if our listeners hadn't figured it out yet, we're going to be talking about difficult conversations today and some ways to think about difficult conversations and ways that we can better engage in those difficult conversations. But before we get into that and to not have it feel so heavy, I've got a story to share about not necessarily a difficult conversation, but we'll call it speaking under duress. So, hang with me here and don't laugh too hard. All right. So I was working in a research lab back in December, or back in the fall semester of last year, doing some research, and it came, December 3rd to be precise. And it was time to present the research that had been done. So prior to going to, present this research, because there were two levels of this research, right? The two levels of the presentation. One was going to be an auditorium style presentation, where there's an auditorium full of people, got to go up there and present your stuff. And then the second one was going to be this sort of poster style presentation, where you're in a big open space. People have these big, beautiful posters with all their research, and folks are just kind of mingling around, walking from station to station, learning about what each research group did. So first up was the auditorium research presentation. Prior to going to that, we had to go to our lab, and I had to close out my research lab just to make sure that everything was in order. I go in there and I, look under one of the cabinets, and I was about to sign off on things. And as I turned, I left the cabinet open, and I'm research. I got to present some research. So I got dressed nice, wearing a nice sweater, got on some good, slacks, looking nice. And I go to turn and walk away from my cabinet and didn't realize that my pants had snagged on the
Oh, wow.
corner of the cabinet.
Oh, wow.
You know where this is going. So,
Wow.
so I take a step away from the cabinet and all I hear is,
Mm.
so, immediately I'm just bolt upright like, oh snap. What just happened? So I'm standing here. There are other people, in the space. I look down. I can't see any rip from the front. So I was like, okay, I'm trying to play it cool, reach around, run my hand around the back. And I'm like, oh no,
Oh,
oh no. Cause you're not supposed to be able to reach around and feel cheeks when your pants are intact. So I had a catastrophic wardrobe failure, ripped my pants, cheek out.
oh
Like,
my goodness.
okay. And I have about 10 minutes before I have to go speak in front of an auditorium of people. So I have no time. I have
Mm.
no coat. I don't have a lab coat. I don't have a jacket that I can wrap around me. Nothing. So it's like, all
Duct
right,
tape?
well, did nothing. I was just going to have to present this research cheek out.
Oh my goodness.
Get into the auditorium, and I got to step down to the speaking area because it's kind of auditorium style seating. So every step down, I hear a little bit more of a little. The rip is growing.
Oh, wow.
So don't have anything. So I take a piece of paper. I just have a piece of paper and had nothing on it. And I'll walk down and I have the piece of paper held behind me. So as I'm walking to the podium, nobody sees it. Presented my research. Everything went well. Was able to put it out of my mind. And then I had to walk back to my seat and used my piece of paper to prevent me from exposing my butt cheek to the entire auditorium of folks. So as soon as I got back to my seat, it's like, all right, well, I got through this. Now I can't use this same tactic for the other one because people are going to be walking around. So I called my wife. When I told her, I was like, hey, can you bring me a new pair of pants? Of course, she immediately thinks that I pooped on myself. And that was the reason why I needed a new pair of pants. So much to her chagrin, it was just a rip and I didn't poop myself. So she brought me a new pair of pants before the poster presentation happened. But needless to say, that was a difficult talking session, wasn't necessarily a difficult conversation.
Wow. I can't even imagine being in that situation, especially with lots of folks around. But we do appreciate you, Frankie, for sharing that very cheeky story.
Oh, no. We're going to get banned for that pun. Oh, my God.
Oh, man. Well, that said, there are situations that come up where you discuss tough topics. They're tough topics. And as I mentioned earlier, they can be both personal or professional.
Mm-hmm.
And there is conversations that come up within this space or things we need to talk about that can be difficult. And so when we think about talking about difficult conversations, how would you describe a difficult conversation?
Well, like many things that we talk about here on the podcast, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. I kind of categorize it by the feeling that I have, that gut feeling I have in anticipation of the conversation. If I feel unease or if I know the things that I have to talk about might be hurtful. And these things can, like you said, they can happen anywhere where there's an interaction between people, a difficult conversation can kind of pop up. And I think too, it's a bit of a dichotomy because it's one thing if you're the person that's the initiator of the difficult conversation. And I think it's another if you're the recipient of a difficult conversation. I think those two things are slightly different, but for me, it's the feeling that I have inside as I'm thinking about the conversation that makes it difficult.
Yeah, man, that gut wrench when you have that situation pop up and deep down inside that something has to take place, that the
Right.
conversation has to take place. But it's such a gut wrench that it kind of takes you back, I think, sometimes. Because some of these conversations are not necessarily immediate. They may be important, but they may not be urgent.
Right.
But then you have situations where the conversation is urgent and you have to move past that gut wrench to get to the other side. So I know
Oof.
exactly what you're talking about there, and that is difficult. That's difficult before you get to the difficult conversation.
Right. Just, I mean, just the anticipation of it can just be debilitating. And sometimes I think that that kind of stays our feet and keeps us from moving forward and engaging with that difficult conversation. And you mentioned sometimes they can be sudden, but I think a lot of times, at least for me, difficult conversations become even more difficult as they fester. It's like a building up
Mhm,
over time, and it's like this
mhm.
pressure cooker, and that pressure's got to go somewhere.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, the difficult conversation is not like, saving every penny that you get to reach a dollar. That difficult conversation, if you're holding on to it, it's not gonna bring any value.
Mm.
Not gonna bring any value at all.
Yeah. And that speaks to when we encounter a difficult conversation. I think that speaks to the paths that we have in front of us. From my perspective, I think we've got two paths that we can go when we have a difficult conversation. Because the need for the difficult conversation isn't necessarily going to go away. So we can either
Mhm.
avoid having the conversation, or we can go ahead and confront it head on and engage in the conversation. And I think there's risk either way we go. So if we decide to avoid a difficult conversation, Nuge, what do you think are some of the things that can happen if we select the avoidance path?
Well, while the avoidance path may seem the easiest path, it actually can be the easiest path to take. Um, you know, like you said, the feeling will fester inside. Whatever's bothering you, if it's a personal situation or the situation in a professional setting could get larger or more out of control
Mm.
if you don't have that conversation. And the avoidance path also, I think, speaks to the confidence of the person who needs to have the conversation. Maybe they're not confident. Maybe someone who needs to have a conversation, let's say with you, Frankie, may not have that confidence or feel comfortable having that conversation with you. So there's that part that you're dealing with sometimes. And if you avoid the conversation, then you miss the opportunity to grow. You miss the opportunity to improve. So I think avoidance, while it may be easy, presents a whole set of problems that one may not want to engage in.
Right. And it may also, affect our identity, the way we perceive ourselves. If we avoid a conversation, we may feel cowardly. We may feel like we're letting ourselves be taken advantage of. So yeah, avoidance, while it may feel good, definitely has risk. And then if we decide conversely, what do you think? When you decide to confront, what are some of the things that we might run into when we decide to go ahead and confront the difficult conversation head on?
Well, I think one of the biggest things when you decide to take things head on is the perception of what you're trying to present, the conversation that you're trying to present. Maybe it's not accepted well. Maybe you're rejected in that
Mm,
situation. Maybe the person that you're speaking to, or even a group that you're speaking to, may turn things around and attack you because they just don't like what's coming out or what's coming forward.
yeah.
Um, and then we were talking about feelings earlier. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings. And I think that's something that can happen when you confront someone with a difficult situation. Feelings can be hurt, theirs and yours, quite honestly. And, then that could lead to a deterioration in relationship. So I think those things come into play when you have that confrontational uh, part of the difficult conversation.
Yeah. And it's it's especially poignant when we're having to engage in that conversation with somebody we care about. Those things are multiplied. The risk that, when we actually take the confront path. And, I don't want the words that we choose here to misconstrue the situation. We're not talking about being confrontational and, being belligerent about it. We're talking about deciding. Yeah, we're not trying to flex on somebody and be like, yeah, like some Mr. T, I pity the fool who doesn't agree with me. Um, we're talking about actually deciding to confront the issue and engage in the difficult conversation, not necessarily being confrontational. But either way we go,
And that you know, not meaning to cut you off, Frankie,
Oh,
but
it's all
even
go ahead.
but that is that plays into the pause of the pause shifting night. You have to make that pause before you have that confrontation to take some inventory as to the situation and how to approach it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we're taking a risk by being the person who initiates a difficult conversation, by even before we've made the decision to confront, whether we avoid or whether we confront, we're taking risk because we've identified, just now, there are problems inherent with both paths where things could go off the rails. So if a difficult conversation is going to happen, it has to mean something to you because we've got skin in the game in a difficult conversation. We're taking risks one way or the other. So we got to make sure that we approach it with the right mindset and approach it in a way that's going to be as fruitful as possible. But there's going to be uncomfortable moments with it. We had our episode where we talked about growth and comfort zone and the cost of staying in the comfort zone. And I think this falls right back into that same conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think that the comfort zone also lends itself to more avoidance for some people than it does for confronting the situation. And I think that that can be, like I said, that could deteriorate relationships. And it can also, in my opinion, lead to a situation where your self esteem or your confidence is lowered because you just don't have that confidence to address the situation. Not saying that you're a bad person if you don't, but that's just part of that inventory that you have to take stock of is what are the consequences of that staying in that comfort zone and avoiding that situation.
That's spot on, and that leads right into a point that's very important here is that we're not saying that we should every choose the confront path for every difficult conversation, right? There are two paths for a reason. And during the pause, we have to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze, for lack of a better term, to make sure that going the confront path is the way to go. Or would we be better served just avoiding this because it's not worth the risk? So that choice of which path we take is very much situationally dependent.
Absolutely. Given that understanding, what should people really do? I mean, how should they arrive at that path that they need to take?
I mean, it really leans into the power of the pause. During that pause, asking and evaluating the right questions. Is this topic around this difficult conversation crucial enough to justify the risks that I'm going to take by engaging in it? And are the risks of avoiding it bad enough to make avoidance not a desirable outcome? We really have to try to get as analytical as we can, and we can only do that in the pause. Sometimes that may be hard to do in and of itself because if we're the one that's planning the conversation, I won't say we have the upper hand, but that gives us more of an opportunity to pause and reflect. But if someone is bringing a difficult conversation to us, it may be troublesome or it may be difficult to find the space to pause and gather yourself before you engage.
Do you think, and I just had this thought come to me, do you think there's a situation or a time where it makes sense to just not have the conversation?
Yes, absolutely. It again, it goes to that, you're basically balancing things on a scale of, risk and reward. We're looking at cost versus benefit. And a lot of the things that we go through on a daily basis in difficult conversations are no different. So, there are difficult conversations that just aren't worth having. And we have to be willing to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I agree. It may be a situation that you, like you said, the reward is not worth the risk, and that may cause some additional hardship on your part. Not really hardship, but may have uh, some other things that come up in your life or make things a little bit more difficult for you. But if the reward is really low, then, yeah, you do have to make the decision if it's something that you want to address. And I would also say that if it's a situation that, by avoiding it today, that situation changes tomorrow or next week, then, you're faced with that same conversation. I would say that, you can no longer roll the dice. You got to just step out there and have that conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, because if it continues to degrade over time, you're just adding more weight to the difficult conversation.
So we talked about, the pause. What other things can we do, or what other things would you say that are part of the structure of a difficult conversation?
Well, ahead of the difficult conversation, and I think this is applicable whether we are the person that is initiating the conversation or having the conversation brought to us by someone else. One of the things that has been most beneficial in my experience is to slow down. I know, especially when it's something that I'm really passionate about, or I really care about, or maybe something that I was blindsided by. My mind wants to speed up. I don't know if, sometimes in arguments, we start talking really fast. You get that really high pitched voice, and we're just rolling, and we're deeply in our emotions, but just taking a second to slow down, being very deliberate about slowing the conversation down is a great way to help, um, I won't say manipulate, to help manage the temperature of the
Hmm.
conversation. So
Hmm.
just being conscious of slowing things down, trying to be as calm as we can.
That makes sense because you don't want to have that type of conversation when you're agitated and your emotions are high. That can just lead to disaster, I think, because like you said, it could be something that you're very passionate about. And if you're highly agitated at that point in time and your emotions are really high, I think things can go downhill really quickly.
Mhm. And if we allow ourselves to get sped up, what effectively we're allowing to happen is we're allowing our mouth to move faster than our mind. And that's not a recipe for success in a difficult conversation.
Absolutely. And then, so now that we slow down, the other part of the conversation structure is, I believe, to listen. You have to, you got to open your ears. You got to listen to what the other individual or individuals have to say about the situation, because that's important as well.
Conversation means that it's a two-way street. You
Mhm.
shouldn't go into it with it being a monologue. It's like, all right, News, I got to have a difficult conversation with you. I'm going to tell you about yourself, and you just going to sit there and you're going to take it and listen. That's not what this is. So we have to be active listeners. And for me, being an active listener means that I'm listening to try to understand, not just listening to better craft my response to you or my rebuttal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was going to say, listening, if you take stock of your listening skills, you can tell another person, well, I'm listening to you, or I heard you, or, that kind of thing. But were you really listening? Maybe you heard me, but did you really listen to me?
You've been eavesdropping in my household because it sounds
Uh,
like the exact conversation when I tell one of my sons for the second time, sometimes the third, like, hey, you need to do this. I heard you. Then why aren't you doing that? Come on, man.
Absolutely, and I think that's true no matter where you are. I mean, that dynamic of father son, but that dynamic of spouse, that dynamic of coworker, you can fall into that trap of hearing very quickly versus listening. And then if you play it back after all said and done, if you play it back, can you honestly say to yourself that you listened to the conversation? Did you really understand, as you said, listening to understand, did you really understand the dialogue that took place about that situation? If you play it back and be honest with yourself, I wonder what that conversation in your head looks like.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking about the conversation in the head, the conversation in my head after the difficult conversation is a telltale sign for me, because if I come to a point in the mental recap after a difficult conversation is like, oh man, when they said this, I should have said that. If I get into
And
that situation, that lets me know that I wasn't really being a good active listener.
absolutely. And I've been in that situation too. I know exactly what you're saying. And that can be hard. But if you take that information and store it for future reference, maybe you listen better, you react differently um, to some other difficult situation that comes up.
Yeah. Experience is a powerful teacher. And I know being burned in a difficult conversation or having a difficult conversation not go well is an experience that you don't want to repeat too many times.
Absolutely not. But difficult conversations are not. Um, I shouldn't say they are not. They are unique, right? They're different.
Mhm.
They're different. As we mentioned earlier, it could be professional, it could be personal. They're different. The dynamic of the people in the conversation, it's different. But they're the same in a certain structure, right? There's certain things that happen in a difficult conversation that are similar, no matter who you are. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, we talked about at the top of the conversation how things are situationally dependent. It could be very different. You and I could have the same difficult conversation on 2 different days and it goes very differently just because
Hmm.
of the things that have happened with us. But, like you said, there's an underlying structure that is similar in all difficult conversations. And this blew me away when I read about it. And by the way, if any of our listeners want to dive deeper into this, there are several books out there that go into this topic. One is just called Difficult Conversations, and another one is called Crucial Conversations. But when I learned about this structure that it's talking about is that when we're engaged in a difficult conversation, it's not actually just one conversation that's happening. There are actually three conversations that are kind of rolled and intertwined into one. And that blew me away because it really helped me to better understand those feelings that I had in the midst of a conversation because I felt like, there was multiple things happening in my mind at one time while I'm trying to navigate a sticky subject with somebody. And when I learned about these three parts or these three conversations that are happening at the same time, it helped me to make better sense of it. So the first part of it is the what happened conversation. And a lot of times in a difficult conversation, this is where we tend to spend most of our time. What happens is talking about, who did what, who said what, where did it happen, when did it happen, who is to blame, how much of our difficult conversations get hung up just on those few questions. And what we really need to understand is that many times we're not debating facts in the what happened conversation. We're basically trying to hash out our different perceptions or interpretations of what happened and how we're reacting to
Yes, that's true. And you mentioned something, the blame game.
it.
It's
Oof.
very easy to fall into that.
Mhm.
And if it's not constructive, folks are just looking for their pound of flesh. If it's not constructive, it can go that way very, very easily. And to go into a difficult conversation without that need to find blame, I don't think that's very easy either.
It takes a level of emotional maturity going into the conversation to avoid falling into the blame game. You think about some of the behaviors that we adopt in our daily routines, especially think about in the professional space, especially
Hmm.
to avoid to better insulate ourselves from the blame game. It's like, oh, I'm not deleting that email. Oh, I'm saving a copy of that. I'm people say I'm going to keep my receipts because they may have been burned once or twice getting caught up in the blame game. It's like, nope, they're not going to catch me again. I'm going to have this whole process in place, and we refer to that as the CYA mentality.
Yeah, we use that same acronym in the military, but I think also while that may protect you, that takes us in probably a whole different episode of things because if you're in a situation where you feel like you constantly have to cover your backside, if you will, that's just that becomes, I think, an unhealthy situation. So that's a whole nother episode that we'll have to get into at some point.
For sure.
Uh, and so we talk about what happened, and then we mentioned this earlier too about the feelings. Um, most conversations or most difficult conversations are because of feelings, whether personal or professional. They are feelings, and I think those feelings, if even in a professional sense, are derived from personal feelings,
Mhm.
right? Some personal loss or what have you. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a big debate. Some people will say, well, you should just keep feelings out of the conversation altogether. We need to have a conversation based on just logic and the facts. And that's a farce, because trying to have a difficult conversation without feelings, the way they characterized it in one of the books, they said it's like trying to have an opera without music. Yeah, there are words, but the understanding is going to get lost in the shuffle.
Mm,
So it's not a question of if feelings are going to come into the conversation. It's a question of when.
mhm,
And we're actually built that way. There are two parts to our brains. We have the limbic system, and then we have like our prefrontal cortex where, logic and thought and all those things live. So, but then that limbic system, that's fast. It moves quickly. And that's where our feelings live. So whenever we encounter a situation, our limbic system is always what fires first. And then we get to the prefrontal cortex. So when you think about it, no matter who you are, no matter how logical you are, we're always going to be emotional before we
mhm.
can get to being rational. So it's safe to understand that feelings are going to come into the conversation.
Absolutely. And not to diminish facts, because those are also important in this difficult conversation.
Mhm.
You need to have facts about the situation and what's going on. But those feelings, mastering that piece or managing that piece within yourself is, it takes work. I'm not saying it's impossible. It just takes work. And it takes you understanding you to know when those feelings pop up and how to deal with them.
Yeah. And that's
And
why,
so,
and I'm sorry, I just want to interject here. That's why slowing down is important.
mhm, mhm.
That's why it's so important. We mentioned that earlier, because when we slow down, that gives us an opportunity to acknowledge, process, and then move forward with those feelings rather than just being blindsided and reacting to those feelings.
All right. So now we come to the third part, which is the identity. What does that say about me? Right. What say you about that, Frankie?
Well, I mean, you think about it. We're in these three parts. We're talking about what happened. At the same time, we've got our feelings swirling around in there. And that third musketeer in there is, what does all of this say about me? What does this situation say about who I perceive myself to be, who I want to be perceived as? Is what I am saying consistent with how I identify myself? Is what the other person is saying, and as I'm trying to understand them, is that consistent with how I view myself, or is it opposed to how I view myself? Especially if we're going into a conversation and then um, the person that we're engaging in the conversation with immediately makes us the bad guy. Like the old story goes, it's like, no matter how good and heroic you are in somebody's story, you're the villain. So how does the conversation, what does this conversation say about me and my identity? So all three of these things, what happened, my feelings, and my identity, are all swirling around at the same time. And that combination of the three is what really is the meat of the difficult conversation.
All right. Well, with that, let me just share a story about a difficult conversation that I had. And let me just say, when you're new to the world of management and managing people, there are there are policies and procedures. There's SOPs for how to manage the business and so forth. But there is no manual for how to address something very personal with an individual. And as a young manager, I think it's even more difficult, these types of conversations, because A, you have no experience in any of this, stuff, right? You have no experience. And so at least you can read the SOPs, right? You can read the
Mhm.
PFPs. But when it comes down to the personal, it's it's pretty difficult. And so I was in a situation where I was leading a group of people, and the some of the team members had come to me and said, "Hey, so and so over here has body odor, smells really bad." And as a young manager, it's certainly not anything I expected to ever have a conversation about.
Mhm.
Right. And so now I'm faced, because, more than one person comes to me and tells me this. So now I'm faced with a situation that I have to address, and it's not in the SOP.
So that leads into a good question then, based on our conversation. How did you evaluate the avoid versus confront fork in the road?
Well, in that situation, for me, there really was no avoidance, because the situation was affecting the team. So there was no avoidance at all. I mean, maybe a few hours until I took that pause to really kind of consider how to approach this situation. So the avoidance was just a non-factor. It was a non-starter.
Okay.
So I had to consider how I was going to approach this individual and have this conversation. And I had to consider things like, we talked about feelings, and I had to consider things like, well, maybe there's something going on with this person at home. Those sort of things that may not be readily noticeable by anyone.
Mhm.
And then I had to consider, what type of person I thought this individual was. Was it someone that was easily approachable? Was it someone that I was going to have to be concerned about them becoming, very defensive and combative, because it's a very personal topic. So I did have to take a beat. And like I said, there was nothing in the SLP to lead me to the right answer. And so the long and the short of it is, I sat down with this person, and I basically I dug into, like mentioned, was there something going on at home? I didn't know if there was some home situation that was creating a situation where they, maybe they just didn't have a place to clean themselves or what have you.
Mhm.
And much to my surprise, this person was very comfortable in speaking with me one on one. Of course, it wasn't like, this was a group conversation, but I think that spoke to the level of respect that individual had for me. And I hope at this point that I, shared that same respect with that person. And so we had a conversation, and there were some difficulties at home for this person. And so, we worked out some things of how we could help them. And they made a commitment to change their um, hygiene habit at that point. And I shouldn't say habit, because I think that the personal situation was affecting, the habits that they normally had.
Understood.
And um, they made a commitment to address that, and move forward. And the situation turned out well, right? We were able to, provide some opportunities and help this person on a personal and private level. And yeah, and it turned around. And so, this individual was not a bad person, was not a difficult person on the team or anything, was just going through a difficult time. So it was not a comfortable situation. It was not a comfortable conversation to have, because, like I said, that is very personal. But it turned out well, and we were able to move past it, and the team continued to grow.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. So you talked about the what happened. Obviously, the what happened part of the conversation was about personal hygiene, right? And if there's what were the contributing factors. So you were trying to get information. The feelings conversation that was going on what were the feelings that you were experiencing as you were having that conversation?
Well, I mean, it's hard to hear that someone that is on your team that you see day in and day out is having some of the problems that this individual was faced with, and that was difficult to hear. Um, I couldn't let that get in the middle of trying to solve the problem or trying to solve the issue, but it was difficult to hear just from a human standpoint.
And I can only imagine, again, as we're engaging in difficult conversations, we can only imagine what the feelings of the other person are unless they, explicitly vocalize them. And that's another piece of that feelings conversation where we may be trying to figure out, like, how's this other person feeling about the conversation too? And that adds to the complexity of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and it was clear that that individual was, feeling embarrassed and, self-conscious about things. And, and it was hard. It was hard because they were really going through some difficult things. So there was a lot of emotion there.
Understandably so. And then did you encounter anything in that conversation that made you question your identity and how you perceive yourself?
I think that was a growth spurt for me because, like I said, being a young manager, not having to have had to deal with that on a professional level before. You grow up and on the block, just like, yo, man, you stink, go take a shower, right? I mean, it was quite different from that.
Right.
I mean, you grew up with those knuckleheads. You're fighting every other day and playing ball and what have you. So you're real comfortable, or you're sleeping in the same room with your brother. It's like, man, I think you need to shower today. This is a shower day for you, right? But that situation I think it was a growth spurt for me because it put me in a situation to be a human, to be empathetic with a situation, but yet also assert some leadership because it was affecting the team and how we were able to perform our job. So I think it was just a growth spurt for me in that whole management arena as a professional and as a human in the personal arena.
Thanks for sharing that story, dude. That was a good one.
Yeah. I didn't have to face that situation many times after, once or twice, but at least I was somewhat equipped to handle that. So, all right. So, um, I think we need to give our audience a little challenge. What do you think?
Sounds great to me.
So, we want to invite our audience to consider difficult conversations that you may be faced with today, conversations that you may be avoiding, and conversations that you may be prepared to confront. Conversations that you've had, conversations that you may need to have, and separate out the three layers that we talked about. Frankie, review the three layers for us, will you?
Yeah, we have the what happened layer, the feelings layer, and the identity layer.
And so, identifying those prior to having your difficult conversation will better equip you for successful outcomes. And, we're not saying any of this to say that every difficult conversation you have is going to turn out perfectly because it quite honestly may not. But if you do the work, you have a better percentage or a better opportunity to have a positive outcome in that conversation. And
100%.
preparation is the key, right? You got to do
Absolutely.
the work.
Absolutely.
You got to do the work. Well, gee, Frankie, I think that was a good session here. I really appreciate the time that we spent talking about difficult conversations, and I appreciate you sharing your story with us about your uh, presentation, so to speak. There,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
appreciate that. That was fun to listen to at your expense. So we're at the end of this episode. Frankie, tell our audience first of all, just thank y'all. We really appreciate y'all being here with us. It's just a great opportunity for us that we get to be in this space and share things with you. And our hope is that it lands with you in a positive way and you are able to take some of what we give you and apply it and have some positive outcomes in your life. So in situations that you have. So we just, we thank you for being here with us. And Frankie, if you have anything to add, and then just let our audience know where to find us.
Yeah, we are truly grateful for everybody that's on this journey with us. And, the reason we do this is because we want to try to have a positive impact, and we want to try to make sure that, we leave the world in a better place than we found it. So thank you for being on this journey with us. And we hope that we're bringing something positive to the table for you. But if you need to know where to find us, go to our website for all things PSI Effect Podcast. This is psipod.com. You'll find a link that'll take you to our list of episodes and where you can find them all. Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, lots of different places. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can find us on social media and YouTube at our handle at This Is PSI Pod. So find us out there. Let's have a conversation.
All right. And make sure you leave us some comments. We read the comments. We love hearing from you. So don't be afraid to drop a note. And so, we're at the end of this episode. We really appreciate you being here. And just remember that setbacks are temporary, and they are only temporary. Comebacks are indeed legendary. And until next time, go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.